Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Luthier Quick Tips. Today is not really going to be so much of a tip as it is going to be somewhat of a rant. I don't do rants very often, but occasionally I'll talk about subjects related to guitars that might be considered somewhat controversial. And the other day, as I was working on one of my guitars, I was also kind of checking Twitter every so often, as I always will do throughout the day. And I noticed there was a controversy that was brewing on Twitter. It seems that there was this brouhaha stirred up over the fact that Iron Maiden had not been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And people were just completely outraged by this. And that really struck me as odd. And you know, I've known about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for many years, and I've never visited the place and doubt that I ever will. And I don't really pay that much attention to what happens. I just sort of know it's there. But I couldn't help but think, why do we even have a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? It just, to me, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You know, I'm the last year of the baby boom generation, and I don't take much pride in associating with the baby boom generation because my values, what's important to me, shift a little bit. And so I'm kind of stuck between the baby boomers and Generation X, and I kind of have this, it's hard to even figure out exactly where I align my beliefs. But one thing I do know is that rock and roll was arguably the music of the baby boom generation. And it really started to become popular in the mid to late 50s, which was when the first baby boomers were starting to reach their teenage years. And then they propelled it through the 60s, really pushed it to heights of popularity that we would have never imagined in the 1970s, and then continued its popularity through the 80s. But then as we started to get into the 90s, rock and roll started to lose its popularity, and it started to slowly fade from the scene until it sort of dropped off a cliff around the beginning of the 21st century. And I think part of the reason is because as the baby boom generation has gotten older, their morals and values have shifted to some degree. And all of a sudden, they think things like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame are important. Well, when I was a kid, kind of following along as these older boomers were, or these boomers were getting older, I thought of rock and roll as the music of rebellion, of teenage angst, protest. I certainly didn't think of it as something that you would celebrate in a Hall of Fame. That never ever made much sense to me when the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame first opened. So in a sense, you can almost see the decline of rock and roll music in its popularity with the existence of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It's almost like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame symbolizes the death of rock and roll. And if that's not enough, there is one other thing that I've become aware of that kind of drives home my point, and that was the existence of these rock and roll themed vacation cruises. What is that all about? I mean, imagine yourself as a teenager today looking at people getting mad about Iron Maiden not getting into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame while their parents are packing up for their rock and roll themed vacation cruise. That is no longer the music of rebellion and teenage angst or protest. So they're all gravitating to something completely different. And as a result, the music that they're listening to doesn't need the electric guitar to play it. And that's kind of sad, because learning to play the electric guitar does more than just allow you to express yourself. It teaches you coordination and skills and musical composition and all sorts of other things. But unfortunately, the baby boom generation, which as I said, I'm a part of, has kind of made rock and roll the sort of musical genre that can't be passed down to the younger generations. I fear that rock and roll is ultimately going to die with the baby boomers. But what's really interesting is something else I've noticed. The guitar has become so popular here in 2021 with country western music. So maybe I'm going to have to kind of change my taste in music. At any rate, let me know what you think about this in the comments below. I'm not looking to start an argument or insult or criticize people or anything like that. It's just an observation I've made just in the last couple of weeks based on what I've seen on social media around the topic of rock and roll. And let's face it, for a lot of us who build and play guitars, it's all about rock and roll. Maybe it should be about country western music. I don't know. At any rate, give this video a thumbs up. I have a feeling I'll get a few thumbs down, but that's to be expected. And until the next episode, take care, stay safe, and I'll see you soon.